In this video, I want to talk how can we set attributes and get attributes, because in VEX many times all we really do is getting some attributes and then we want to set them or move them along somewhere else. So first of all, let's go to the help, and in reading attributes you may remember that we use a lot of detail attribute, which basically give me the value of our detail attribute. Of course there's primitive, point and vertex, but the one that maybe not very popular one is the just addattrib function, which is basically saying give me any of these types. So in the actual function we can define what kind of attribute we want to get. So let's try it out. Let's write attrib. Then you can see in geometry, let's just put down a box. Since it's connected to the wrangle, let's put it in 0 like that. Now let's say attribute class, since it's going to be a string, so let's say I want to get an point attribute, and then so the name of it, so we know that our box really the only one that we have with the points are the let me actually make this live. So at points we have p, so let's make a position, and we're also in quotes, and then which element number. So for us to all get them all, let's say add ptnum. Let's close it down. So first of all, you can see we get this very line. That means we basically, although we have written this function, there's nowhere for this value to go. For that, let's just create our custom attribute. So we know it's a p, so it's going to be a vector. So we add my value equals this function. You can see now we are basically duplicating these values up to our new attribute, but let's run it over the primitives. You can see that there are problems with that because there are discrepancies, because we do not have so many primitives. So this is a box, so there's only 6 primitives, but we have more points than it, so it does copy it, but it's not very useful for us because it doesn't really represent the data that we're gonna copy. So you always have to be kind of mindful when you're working and moving data from data types around. So you can also move it to the vertices. You can see now it's even more, but it's still going to fill all of the vertices. So for vertices, you can see there's actually 3 values for each one of these. So these points there are points, and imagine for every point there are 3 vertices values. So it is a kind of different data type. You can see it's basically for every 3 it's the same value for 3. If you take a look at, there's even a point number option to take a look at it. What's cool about this, we can actually visualize our attributes. So you can go to this kind of like GPS marker, and then scene, press on plus, and let's create a marker. Let's just copy our attribute, which is my value. So event it as text. The font size, let's make it large, so you can easily see them. And that's it. Copy color, something easily visible, like that. Just close it down. You can see now. You can see that in our vectors we have visualized them. You can see at every point, at every vertex, there are 3 values. Let's take a look. Let's turn on the point numbers. So now it's 1. So you can see if you take a look at point numbers, so 1 is here. Let's mark them. You can see basically 0.5, and then it's negative. The rest of them are negative. You can see it matches with it, and that's for every point. You can kind of find the values actually on the geometry. It is kind of hard to like that. So this is 4. Let's go to the 4. So negative going to be on both sides, and positive going to be on middle. So that's one cool thing we could do, and then just go here and you cannot delete it. We don't really need it. Another cool thing, since we are using this more general attrib function, we can actually create the UI elements for our point string and add ptnum. So let's go to the edit parameter interface, and you can see that we have already this run over. So let's find this run over inside our type properties. So run over, you can see it's a class. So you can see in the menus there's a basically menu and label. And we can do is just copy parameters, Control C, and paste parameters, Control V. And let's just put it to the top. So let's in parameters, so it's going to be class. Let's my run over, and class 2 can stay. So my run over and accept. So basically what we have now is spare parameter that doesn't really do anything, but what we can do is actually point this over at point. So we do not have to. So let's say you want to get attribute that is maybe from primitives. So we don't have to actually write it, we can just select from here. So let's just reference with ch in brackets. So that's going to be our, so that's class 2. Like that. And that's it. Now let's make a color node. And with color node, let's create this whatever color we want. Let's make it sure that we have it at primitive. So now let's say we have this setup. So we want to get a primitive attribute and copy it to the points. So run over the points, and now you have to select the primitives. So this is going to basically, instead of writing it, we can select primitives. And we know that we want to see the attribute. So we have to change that like that. You can see we are now copying this color 0, 0.5 and 25. You can see we are copying, but you can see that last two are empty because we have more points than primitives. So that's what happens when we have there's too many values and we copy them to this. So basically last two are empty because we have more points than actual primitive faces. So, and I remember to use the actual add pt num because we want to add points, run it over the points, since we're getting information from add points. Now let's take a look at the same functions only with existing check. So the only really difference is that at the end of this string we're gonna give a integer value that's going to check if the attribute that we want to reference or get the values from is real. So if it's real, it's going to be 1. If 0, then it's going to be that this attribute does not exist and we do not get its value. So let's just, first of all, let's create a detail attribute that we want to reference. Let's detail and let's make it a 10. Now let's duplicate it. Let's connect it to this one. So now we have our detail attribute, which is 10 in here. Let's try to get it. So let's go here and take a look at it. So get attrib. So first of all, we want to geometry. So if it's connected to the wrangle node, it's 0. Attribute class, we know it's a detail, so it's string in a quotes. We want to get a detail. Attribute name, so my attribute name was test. Let's just copy it and paste it inside here. So at that the element number, so since it's a detail attribute, it's going to be 0. Let's take a look at the actual documentation. So at the not the get attrib but the specific detail attrib, it specifies since it's ignored, it passes 0 for this argument, because for detail this can be only one value for each attribute. So we just have to write 0, and at the end of it we have to give whatever integer value. So get attributes, you can see it's going to be basically a success flag. So I'm going to write 70 whatever. That's it. Now let's take a look. And now since we get this again spherical line, we have to actually give it somewhere to go. So I'm gonna go my int, and let's make it to the points. So you can see it's 10 for every point that we created. In here we can see that it got its value, but from this line we couldn't really tell, because first of all we can write it in here in test, whatever, even the attribute that is not even exists, and it's still not going to fail. It's going to write just the zeros. So we couldn't really tell whether it's got its attributes values. We have to look at here. So first of all, what we have to do is create a integer variable. So I'm gonna write the integer variable, which is gonna call my var. It's in its value can be whatever. And now we have to reference this value inside our last pocket of our expression, because first of all, it's going to be set to 0 or 1. And in here, just a plain number, we can't really tell what value is going to be. Its value doesn't really change, and we can't really reference it to take a look at later if it's 0 and 1. So all we have to do is just copy this and paste inside here, and that's it. And now if we print out this value, it's going to be 0 or 1. Just use a printf. So it's a d/n, and then the variable we want to print out, like that. Printf, like that. And now let's take a look at our console. You can see, press enter, you can see it's 1 because we got the value got printed. And let's say you want to get the value that doesn't even exist. Let's say hello. You can see now it's 0. Basically this we know that it's failed because there's no such value. It's basically this is as the help says it, this is because there can be actually attributes that are zeros. So that's why we have this value that actually going to be 1 or 0, because that actual attribute value can be 0. So another thing you will quickly notice that, let's say we want to use, let's say I want to get the p.x values, and let's change them. Well, first of all, I could just add p.x equals 1, like that. You see that basically this does at every point for it. It runs over every point of it and adds and puts it 1. If we, let's say, plus and equals, that's going to be add 1 to the value that's already there. But if we, let's say, want to p.x equals at ptnum, it's basically saying the number, its value is going to be the number of the point. So every point has its number. You can see that it matches up like that. So, but in this way we can't really, let's say I want to specify only the fourth point. I want to specific value for fourth point. With this method, with this very simple method, we can't really do that. So that's why we use all of these reading attributes. So let's just make a point and let's create only the one value. How can we do that? So let's use a point. Let's take a look. Point, so geometry could be 0, and we want to p and point number 3. So what we have got is this. We have got this value, but of course it is going to be silent because we are not putting this value anywhere. So I'm gonna just create, and since it is a vector, we always have to create a vector type. I'm just gonna make a variable vector. My vector equals points. Let's just print it out. Just copy my vector. Let's take a look at it. So in console you can see we have copied the fourth value, but one thing that you might instinctively think that, hey, if I want to get the, let's say, y value, all I have to do is just p.y, and from the vector, since we want to get we have to change it to integer or float even, because it's a float, like that. You can see it's going to fail out. It's not going to work. The main takeaway from this is that we can't really specify the specific element of any of the same attribute with these either points or whatever where we want to read attributes, detail, prim, or whatever attributes. For that, all we really have to do is, once we want to reference it, all we have to do is just end it with x, y, or z. So let's say I want to, now we're printing the whole vector. Let's say I want to print only the y value. All we really have to do is dot y. Since my vector is a vector type, we press down dot y. You can see it's going to now basically be a float value. Now let's just change our value like I did in here, my vector dot y. Let's make it maybe 10 equals 10. Now if you take a look at the console, you can see it's a 10, but the thing is that we basically just took this value and create a variable from it. It's not actually changing inside our geometry, since our basically just took its value and then moved it around and changed it. It didn't actually change the actual value of a third point in our geometry. For us to actually change this value inside our attributes, what we have to use is the set point attrib function. Let's start writing it. Set point. Let's take a look what it does. So basically what it's going to do is set point attribute in geometry. So the syntax looks pretty simple. All we really have to do is geo handle, then the attribute, we know it's a point. After that the point number. So let's say we want to 3 because we took it from 3 in here. After that the new value, and in here it's basically going to expect for us to give a vector value, because this p is also a vector value. But for test, let's just write it 1. Let's put it to mode as a set. Let's take a look what it does. And for the mode, you can see at the end of it, it's actually specifies it's an optional for given. For the set, it's basically override the attribute with the given value. But in this, since we want to override it, we can actually just delete it. Do not use anything after the given value, and it's still going to do the same thing. There are some more cooler things that we can do, especially with the append I'm gonna show later on, but for now we can just ignore the mode because it is optional, and for us it doesn't really matter right now. So like look at this, you can see it basically what it did is brought in 1 in a x in x, but you can see that, let's say I want to, how can I actually write inside the y? So it does expect the vertex vector value, but it still works because it's pretty forgiving for us. It's just going to write in the first value and then just leave the y and z alone. But what we can do is just reference this vector that we just created, which is my vector. Let's paste it inside here, and since it is the data type that it's basically asks for vector, and we give it vector, you can see it's correctly pasted inside our negative 0.5, 10, and 0.5, which basically matches with our vector in here. If you take a look, if I print out all of it, you can see it's the same value that we have now. Now let's take a look at some of these optional modes that we can use in VEX in this kind of set point attrib command. So you can see it's set, it's the most basic one, which is basically just overriding the value that there already is and putting inside there. So for the add, let's take set add. Let's take a look. It says that it's now 26. So in this, it says that add the attribute the value. So the value is going to be, so if you think about it's 10, so 26 minus 10 is going to be 16. Why does it get 16? So basically what it does is it basically multiplies 2 by the points that how many we have. So we have 8 points. 8 multiplied by 2 is 16, and 16 plus 10 is 26. And let's say you want to now, since the set point attribute is independent from whatever we run it over, so let's run it over points. You can see now it's 28. So let's multiply it by 2 again. So for the points it was 26, and for the primitives it's only 22. So why is that? If you take a look at the primitives, how many times this command was run over primitives is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 multiplied by 2 is 12, and 12 plus 10 is 22. So that's how we get different numbers when we select whether it be points or primitives and something like that. So even though this function is independent from the what we overrun it over, but we do get different values when we select the what we want to run it over. So you do have to kind of keep in mind that. Now what I want to show is probably the coolest one is the append function. So you can see I have my string attribute, which is a string attribute. That is number, and what I want to do is actually create this string with the number of the point that it is. So I wanted this number. This number is 0, this number is 1, and so on. So that we can do that with the very cool append function in this mode. First of all, we want to create another string attribute, which is going to hold our point number values, but it's going to hold it as a string and not an integer values, because we can't really combine string with the integer values or any different matching attribute types. So all I'm going to do is at my values equals, and for this string all we really have to do is write an sprint function. If you remember in previous video we used it, it's basically the same thing as print. It's only going to print it out as an attribute, as a string attribute. And then the formatting, which is for now it's only the procedure size and D, and after the quotes we have to write what we want to write inside. So we want to write inside at ptnum, like that. And now if you take a look, we have now string value that holds our point numbers, like that. And of course you could hold it one number or whatever, or +1, like that. Now we have our values, and for this to work all we really have to do is now use this. Let's go back, set point attrib function with the mode append. I'm just going to copy this one. Let's paste inside here. So first of all we have to put down, so first of all we want to my string effect, because this is the main string that we want to modify. After that we have to say which points we want to affect. We know that we want to run it over all the pockets, so add ptnum. After that we have to say which is the attribute that we want to add, so it is my values. I'm just going to copy it, and since it is attribute, make sure you also copy add my values, and that's it. All we have to do is write append, like that. Now you can see we have modified our my string attribute with the added number at the end of it, and you can see that in the what follows between these we can write actually whatever is inside here. You can see it's going to write inside here in the formatting. In a sprint you can see it's a format string, in what format is going to write it in. If you don't want anything, just leave it at %sign and D. One thing to note that even though we created this string, my values, it is kind of for the visual that we can see what it does, because we do not actually have to write it as an attribute. So let's just create it as a string, and let's just print it out and see what it actually does. Let's delete this and just create a variable, and not just as a variable, not an attribute. So my values, and let's print it out. Let's copy my values. Let's take a look how it looks. Let's disable this one for now. Take a look at what it does. Let's clear it out and run the ON. You can see that basically it's created the same values, only now without writing them in as an attribute. So we can actually reference this variable inside our setPoint attrib. I delete it, and now we have to just where we add my values, just delete add. You can see it's basically works the same. Another thing is that with the setattrib functions with any of them, you can see that if we reference the attribute that does not exist, you can see it does not error out, but actually gonna create this attribute based off of what kind of data we want in. So let's say 2.0, now it's a float. For the string, we can just write in anything. See, now it's a string, and it's right value only in that one, in the third point. For the vectors, it's just we can use the curly brackets and with the 3 values inside it. You see, now we have vector value. With any of these, basically I'm gonna create a new attribute based off of value that we specify in here. It's going to be either vector or whatever data type that we want it to be. If you want to change the attribute class on it, set the point attrib. First of all, we could use the generalized setattrib function, which is a little bit more longer, which is basically gonna cover all of the data classes, all 4 of them. Or we can just, let's say, point, if you want to make it a primitive attribute set, you can just change the beginning of it. So set primitive attribute. As you can see, even though we are running it over the points, you can see we are still writing inside my string it as a primitive attribute class, my string. But in here, instead of point tree, it's in a primitive tree in here. So for the vertex, you can see it's going to error out because the syntax is a little bit different. If you compare it, so geohandle name is the same, primitive number, so that's 3, it's fine, vertex number, and then the value. So we need the vertex number inside here, just like I showed in there. So I'm just gonna put it at 2, like that. Let's take a look. You can see now 3.2 is now copied inside our string in 3.2. So basically the prim number is 3 and the vertex number is 2. That's where these 2 come from, 3.2. If you want to copy it to the 1, all we have to do is 1. You see now it's 3.1 is copied my string. And now let's convert it to the detail attribute. So first of all, let's set detail. Let's take a look at the syntax for the detail attribute. For detail, it seems a bit easier. So geohandle, the name string, value, and mode. So we can basically delete all of these. It's not unnecessary. Its value is going to be, let's just say 3. And the mode actually is optional, so we can just leave it like that. If you take a look at our detail attribute, we are now test2, and it's 3. And of course, if you want, let's my string, like that. Now we have a string. So the data type that we write inside is basically going to specify what kind of data type it is, whether it's a vector, it's a string, or whatever. Just like in there, if I write in 3 values inside curly brackets, now it is a vector, and since the detail, it's going to be 3 different values. One last thing, let's look at how can we add attributes. So when you remember when we set detail attributes, remember when we created these attributes that does not exist, you can see that it only changed the value that we wrote it in, and all of them, rest of them were 0. So let's take a look at addattrib, where we can actually make all of the values at some with our determined value in it. So this is the most basic one. It's basically addattrib, the general one. Let's add attrib. So geohandle 0, attribute class. Let's make a point class, my point for the name, and then we have to, what's the value for it? Let's say 21, like that. So you can see it basically wrote it in at every point 21. One thing is to note that it does not, you see at the end of it, you see default values. In strings and arrays, attributes cannot have defaults. So basically, if I start, so in this set attribute, when you wrote in the string, it worked perfectly fine. But in here, when we add this attribute, I start writing string, you can see it does not work. In this case, even though we have created this attribute, my point, in point class, even though we're at the primitives, what you can do is just use the set point attribute function and then add the actual string attribute, because we do remember that it perfectly fine works with the set detail attribute. At this point, this is point attribute. So let's just create the set point attribute. So for 0, to that the name, so we went to my point. I just copy it. And then the point number that we need to affect on. So we want to add, we can either, let's just say on point 2. And its value is going to be the actual string name. So this is my second string, like that. Now you can see we have copied this value in our so that's going to be second point, and we can even switch between them. You can see it still works. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope you found something useful in it. See you next time.